Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love Norfolk so. So here we are then, boys and girls, back on the promenade at Sheringham. I'm where I left you in the last episode. We'll continue the walk now, climbing up to the esplanade and along to the Coast Watch building at the top of the cliffs. I was telling you about my long stay in hospital with a smashed left ankle. I was in hospital for about 14 months all in all. But the problem was the first 3 operations that they carried out on the smashed ankle all failed, and in the end they approached me and said that they wanted to amputate the ankle completely and join my foot to the bottom of what was left of my leg. And I told them to shove it where the sun don't shine. I told them, even if I couldn't use the leg, I would at least look normal. I was 21. I was trying to attract women. I didn't want to stand in a pub with one leg shorter than the other, did I? But I can hear you crying out. What's going on here? These videos about him walking about. How can that be? Well, it was all down to the brilliance of one man called Pilcher. He was a consultant orthopaedic surgeon that heard about my refusal for letting the hospital amputate bits of my body, and he approached me and he said, how would I like to be a guinea pig in an experimental operation? Never been tried on a human. And I asked him, I said, what happens if it fails? He said, well, you won't be any worse off, will you prick? Very briefly then, if you're curious, what the man did was take all the little broken pieces of bone and that shit, and they put it all back together using piano wire. Absolutely marvellous. Now this of course was over 50 years ago. I don't think the NHS of today have got the time to concentrate on one patient quite so much, do you? They're now putting out messages asking you not to ring 999 unless it's an absolute emergency. They're so overwhelmed. Okay, that's enough about all that shit. We've got to move on, okay? So here's a story that made me smile. It's Thursday the 12th of December and this is taken from the Daily Mail. Tunnel of Love. Tube driver is probed after boasting of enjoying a sex romp while driving passengers between King's Cross and Caledonian Road. Well, have you seen the cab of a tube underground train? It's about the size of a small packet of crisps. How the hell do you have a romp? I wouldn't have called it a romp. She said she performed a sexual act on a colleague as the tube went from King's Cross to Caledonian Road in North London. Well, are they having sex on the trains now? I mean, whilst they're driving along, I mean, whatever next? Bus drivers? I mean, is it me? Now, there used to be a kids' game, a contortionist game called Twister. And what you did was you all writhed about on the floor and you ended up with 4 kids all tied into a reef knot. Now, I can only assume that this is what it was something like inside the cab of that tube train, what with all them pedals and levers and things. So, as I've already said, you can't unlearn things. And now, I'm looking at other places where sex act may be going on. What about the girls serving you the groceries at the checkout in the supermarket? Is there some big hairy bugger underneath the counter with her there? Here's a tip for you then. If you want to improve your running speed, do it at night in a bad part of the city, because the fear of being murdered will make you run faster. This esplanade is an absolute blaze of colour in the summer. I'll bring it back and show you later on. Now we're climbing up these few steps to the Model Boating Lake. The Model Boating Lake. Model boating has quite a large following, and some of the vessels that they bring up here to play with, if that's the right word, are really elaborate. There's destroyers with guns that fire, sound effects and all manner of things. Really, really big into the hobby. But the one that fascinated me the most once when I was here was a submarine. And I said to the guy, pity it don't submerge, and he said, oh yeah it does, watch. I'll show you this one. This one sold for about 150,000 quid or more. Now, you remember in episode 1 I talked about our local newspaper, the Eastern Daily Press, or EDP for short. Well, on a cold December morning, this paper never fails to entertain me, and I'll read you out one of their major headlines. Japanese collectibles shop to open in Norwich city centre this week. Well, is it me? Is the country crying out for a chain of Japanese collectible shops across the country? And what will it be called? Jacknacks? Jack Knickknacks? Knickknack Japs? I can just keep going. Wonderful idea. Now, the first activity that should be carried out when starting any new business, whether it's a product or a service, is to carry out market research. That is to say, you've got to find out whether there is actually a market for your product or service in the first place. So I can only assume there must have been hundreds of people on the streets with placards and the like saying we want Japanese knickknacks. Now, unless, my dear viewer, you've been living in a cave for the last 4 or 5 years, you would have noticed that shops in the high street are closing. They're closing down. There are well-established brands and names that just can't make it because they can't get the people to walk in and buy their product. Now, before you lot all start having a pop at me, I am speaking as someone who has started from the ground a couple of retail businesses. Probably the most important word for a retail business is position. Position, position, position. You need to know that the people are there. It's called the foot flow. Now, I chose places where the competition had already done all the market research and they'd already got the prime position. So I set up shop right next door and undercut them because I could get product about 50% cheaper than what they could. The result of this was, of course, they bought me out for a substantial profit. Now, these people have also set up shop in the Royal Arcade in Norwich, a very expensive piece of real estate. Now, me, personally, I would have tried to take on one of the market stalls on the market opposite and try and sell my Japanese knickknacks there first. Just for a year or two with minimal outlay to see whether I got a business or not. So it is clear to me that Jacknacks Nippon R Us is going to be on a high street near you very soon. A few years ago, I bumped into an old friend of mine, an old lady. She came from Yorkshire, and she was walking down towards the beach, and what she said will remain with me for the rest of my life. I said, "Are you going down to look at the sea?" And she said, "Why would I want to look at the sea? I know what it looks like." Now, I realise that was a piss poor attempt at a Yorkshire accent, but I haven't lived there for 50 years, have I? But Norfolk, let's do a little bit of Norfolk. Are you going shopping this afternoon? Davy, are you going shopping this afternoon? Now, seagulls. I like seagulls. I know not a lot of people like them, but I do because of the aerobatics that they get up to. Fantastic creatures if you chuck a handful of chips up. You should try it sometime. Well, that's it, boys and girls. That completes the promenade walk for Sheringham. There will be more later when I come down off of the Coast Watch, but for the time being, I hope you've enjoyed yourself and that you had a little giggle here and there. So, I get an awful lot of things just walking up and down. See ya.